Namaste, namaste to one and all. A very warm welcome to the fortnightly Indic Samvad brought to you by the Institute of Indic Wisdom, which has been metamorphosized from what was the Center for Consciousness Studies and Inner Transformation at Indic Academy. I would like to begin with a short invocation. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Punaktu सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We are very blessed to have among us Shri Raghava Krishna ji and also Shri Raghava Anantanarayanan ji. I would like to introduce both of them. Raghav ji carries 22 years of experience across game development, academia, and entrepreneurship, with expertise in leading creative product development teams, learning design, and organization culture. He was the development director at Electronic Arts, which is also referred to as EA Sports, where he led product operations for EA's mobile game development studio in Hyderabad. He co-founded Rashtam School of Public Leadership and served as the Assoc Dean there. He is currently the founder and CEO of Brihat Culture Creatives and Brihat Educational Trust, with a focus on cultural storytelling, IKS education, and leadership development. As a student of Indic knowledge systems, he seeks to provide perspectives on tackling global challenges from an Indian civilisational worldview. We also have Shri Raghava Anantanarayanan. He is the host and the co-founder at the Institute of Indic Wisdom. Shri Raghava Anantanarayanan is the alumnus of IIT Madras. He's a behavioral scientist, a yoga teacher, and an author. The central quest has been the inquiry how to continually look within, transform, and be the best and inspire. This seeking led to discipleship with Yogacharya Krishnamacharya, dialoguing with J. Krishnamurti, and collaborating with Professor Pulingar. He has dedicated his life to the study and application of yogic traditions to guide the inner transformation of individuals and shape leadership and culture building of organizations. He has pioneered the use of Yoga Sutras, traditional theatre, and Mahabharata in experiential learning. Raghu has authored several books. Some of these are The 5 Seats of Power, Antaranga Yoga, and he has also written the TAO, that is the Totally Aligned Organization. He has co-founded Sumedh Academy of Human Context, the Barefoot Academy of Governance, and right now he is co-founding the Institute of Indic Wisdom. We're very, very delighted to have both of you with us. Before I hand it over to you, Raghu, I would just like to share a little bit about IIW, and we would have you speak more about it. The Institute for Indic Wisdom is committed to amplifying the global permeation of Indic wisdom through partnerships, alliances, and self-organizing networks. In the long run, IIW will serve as the nodal institution that will energize a global Indic wisdom movement. We seek to translate Indic wisdom into practical tools, frameworks, and approaches for individual, organizational, and ecosystem transformation. This is what we are referring to as moving from Sanatana, that which is timeless, to Nitya Nutana, that which is regenerating and ever replenished. IIW undertakes mining and deep study of Indic Shastras, contemporizing the nuggets of wisdom, contextualizing them for solving current problems. IIW specifically focuses on three areas: applied Indic psychology, applied Indic leadership, and applied Indic organizational design. Our Indic Samvad series is an endeavor to discuss, deliberate, and dialogue intelligent ways of doing just this. We invite renowned speakers across the world who not just share their approaches, but also lay out possible impediments that may be found in this journey. So on that note, I would hand it over to Raghu to take us through this journey, and also to Raghuji. Thank you so much.
Yes. Now Raghav is also called Namrata. We have to change his name also. Yeah. Raghav, before I come to you and ask you to have this dialogue with me, let me just place the perspective. Yeah. See, one of the things that most people don't seem to realize is every civilization has had its own ways of dealing with all aspects of life. Yeah, and the Indian civilization has had a uniqueness in doing this. This is my understanding, because it looks at everything around from a human perspective. So life is looked at, the whole of life is looked at through the 5 koshas, right? The pancha bhutas is again the same 5, and so on. So there's a certain continuity and a seamless way of going from the individual into the whole. Yeah, so what we have done in Indic Wisdom, Institute for Indic Wisdom, is to say that there are 3 very critical aspects of this whole interdependent knowledge system, which for current times maybe we need to work with a lot of attention, right? Which is Indic psychology, like Namrata was saying, mining. So we've studied Yoga Sutras and Vedanta in depth, and there are lots of extremely important ideas of who is a human being, what is a good life, and all of that, which has to inform the way in which we look at people today. Yeah. We can't bring in Western psychology and look at people when we have our own psychology, idea of psychology, which has developed our civilization. Yeah. Right? Now, when you apply this to leadership, therefore, our leadership will have certain factors which are unique, and because you're dealing with resources, there'll be some factors which are similar to other people. Yeah. And also, therefore, organizations, because organizations are people plus leadership. So we're focusing on these areas, saying how do we bring in the best thinking and what you're calling civilizational perspectives to bear on these 3. Right. So we're inviting you here to share with us your understanding of leadership and organizations, and how you're relating it to Indic ideas. And so take it from here, Raghav. Right. Let's have a fun discussion.
Yeah, fun. I think we'll definitely have, and this is actually a special occasion for me for 2 reasons. One, because this conversation with you is something that I've already played out in my mind a few times over the last 3-4 years.
Okay.
It's actually quite funny because at least 5 different occasions, the people that I met and I have sort of organically connected to, resonated with, discussed ideas, and saw a great amount of consonance and convergence. Eventually, all of them turned out to be connected to you. Right? So in my mind, this conversation has already happened. We are just manifesting it here for the public. So I've already, I've studied your works. I've listened to your thoughts. So I already know the mind that is sort of creating this consciousness and what you're aiming to do with this new initiative. And the second reason I'm very excited about this is because this is home ground. Indica is an organization that I've cut my teeth with when I moved from whatever I was doing earlier to what I'm doing now. a lot of my learning was created, enabled, and facilitated by the initiatives that Indica had taken. I always feel at home, and I always feel like I'm speaking to my own people when I speak here. Although we are doing this for a public consumption, for me, this is a conversation amongst friends and people that and I learn and co-create with. So that's exciting. Uh, I have no delusion that I will be able to bring out an insight about Yoga Sutra or about any of our traditional texts. In a meeting that has you, or in a conversation that has you, I would rather seek to that extent to actually ask a few questions that might help all of us learn from the wisdom and the lifetime's work that you put behind this. But whatever I speak and whatever I share is my own journey and my own learning, and this is my assimilation. Right? It is not exhaustive, it's not comprehensive either, but it is true. Right? And so when I speak about Indic ideas for organization, when I try and represent a certain idea with a full understanding of my own limitation, I do that because I have experienced the power of that idea in myself. So I'm not doing this. Not doing this for posterity. I'm not doing this because it sounds nice. I'm not doing this because there's a nice buzz around it, and I'm not doing this because we can generate a certain kind of discourse around it. For me, it is important simply because it is true, and I know that this truth has universal value. Because at the end of the day, like you've written and we've discussed it many times as well, the concerns are universal and they are eternal. Beyond all the urgency that culture and technology infuses into our daily lives, our fundamental concerns about who we are, about what is a good life, all the things that you've laid out, they are not just the same, but they are in a dire need of a very specific articulation. And I simply find the Indic articulation of this to be the best that I have in my limited exploration come across. So for me, the first and the foremost attraction or the conviction is because there is truth content based on my own experience. So I don't need to validate it through something else. I know my own suffering. I know my own sense of ascendancy. I know my own despondency. So these are things that all of us experience, and then you latch on to certain ideas and see if those ideas help you. Right? And firmly, it is about managing your energy, managing your mind, managing the resources that all of us have, and how do you elevate the impact that you can create by managing that better. Right? And it is here that I've always found the yogic insights to be not just the most profound, but also the most practical. A lot of literature exists, whether it is the theory of organization or the theory of leadership. There is simply just so much of literature because it's a constant area of study. But what I find unique about our literature is that it gives you the tools to experience it yourself. So when you say dharana, you don't need any other validation. When you say you get into a meditative state and you try and look at a certain issue or a certain situation from that perspective, you experience the clarity of that insight yourself. And these are tools that enable that level of consciousness. Right? So this is, for me, it comes from that perspective that it is actually attestable by your own experience. So that's one. Secondly, I think the introduction that Namrata just gave about the Indic Institute of Wisdom, and I'm very, very excited about this initiative because I think it's time that we consolidated and we sort of, took the Indian perspective about leadership and organizations to the world. And I feel an urgent need for this for many reasons that I will get into. But the simple introduction actually, I think, gave us the Indic theory of organizations itself. Right? Like life itself, like what happens at the cellular level. We've read Fritjof Capra. He talks about the link between identity, structure, form for coherence. Right? The words that Namrata used, and I think it's very thoughtful and very well framed, about replication, about partnering with others for amplification, about replication and self-organizing. I think these are the enduring and in many situations in the world today, elusive principles. And it is here that I think Indian theory of organizations has a very profound and a very urgent contribution to make. Right? Because what we see in what we call the civilisational worldview is a kind of coherence right from the stories of creation to the stories of organizing the society to the theory of organizing yourself and the production of knowledge and the validation of truth content in that knowledge. So if you look at all of these things, that is what forms the system, right? That you have a certain cosmology or a truth claim, you have a way of replicating it, you have a way of understanding it yourself, and you have a way of designing whatever it is. It could be a societal design, it could be an organizational design, it could be designing your own dinacharya. There is a consonance at all levels, and everything seems to be fitting in with the next level. That's why we constantly use this idea of fractal in describing the Indian civilization. I think that is the challenge in a globalized world, and when you have organizations that span entire continents and with asymmetric power over resources, over discourse, over policy, you really need to have a way of thinking how independence at a local level can be combined with interdependence at higher levels. And that, I think, is a study of civilization. And leadership today requires, I say this with a lot of responsibility, but with utter conviction, that leadership today absolutely requires you to expand the field of gaze. It is no longer enough if you are just thinking about the market and the organization and to a certain extent your people. You need to study history, you need to study psychology, you need to study social structures, you need to study complexity, you need to study systems. All of these things, personally, I found the best exposition of this to be contained in the Indic literature that we have. The rigor in the Shastra method, the clarity of perception that you get when you read something like a Yoga Sutra, just the empathy, not the shallow empathy, but the real, deep, enduring empathy that is able to create opportunities based on your starting point. Whatever your natural prakriti is, to create a pathway for you to flourish. And in doing that, it is tying you to a larger entity. It is giving you a way to make meaning out of your own life by contributing to something else. I think whatever societal breakdown that we're seeing today, whenever you hear about the mental illness state or the pandemic of loneliness, these are all just symptoms of a deeper problem, that we've lost touch with something more fundamental. And I think that's where the connection between the individual and, like you said, the field of play, which is the organizations, that is the opportunity that we have here. So these are my initial thoughts on this. And I will talk about where I found the gap in current organization design and where I think our frameworks have a telling impact going forward. But I actually wanted to get your thoughts on this first, Raghu. What are the areas that you see as most fertile and most necessary interventions for an Indic theory of leadership to make about organizations?
So let me start with the last thing you said, Raghava, which is the crisis that we are facing. Yeah, when Prasad, me, and Saiji were looking at, we were looking at the World Economic Forum report.
Yeah.
It's about a 50-60 page report, and it talks about things that have been talked about from 1970s, when the Club of Rome report came out and the systems thinking thing came out, and there's nothing new. And some of the people who wrote that original thing have been sidelined. In main science, because they talked about things that were not very comfortable at that point of time. But in that whole 80-page odd report, there was not one mention about the mind that creates the crisis. So we found this extremely strange. Right, because it's not as though these institutions and the idea of organizations and how they look at resources have come out of thin air. They've come out of human minds. So that was very critical point for us. And then there's this whole, around the same time you had ChatGPT come out. And it's obviously something without a soul. And you see the way people are talking about ChatGPT. They talked about the locomotive in the same way. They talked about every scientific discovery in the same way. And you look at it and say, hey man, this is again going to be one more tool which depends on the person who's using it. Tool itself you don't discuss because it's just a piece of technology. You have to actually look at and ask the question, who is using this? And in Indic thought, exactly like you said just now, I like the way you said, look, I don't need any validation. I've experienced something. This is my truth. I'm taking responsibility for it. Right? Now, when you have to say that, and you have to say that responsibly, you have to ask yourself, who am I?
Yeah.
And be very serious about looking at yourself, your own limitations, your shadows, and all of this. Right? And I think the first book on leadership for me, which is Mahabharata, talks about all of this. Right? It talks about these 5 ways of using power, the shadow characteristics of it. What does a leader do when he goofs up, right? And all of that. Versus the same, people with similar capabilities who don't take any of this seriously.
Yeah.
Right? The Kauravas don't take self-reflection seriously. When they make a mistake, they just do more of the same.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a very simple, obvious link.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, so that is the first thing that struck me when you were speaking, and I said that's an Indian way of speaking. That's super. So then you can now take responsibility. If you call yourself a leader, you then take responsibility for what is happening around you, what you generate around you, how compassionate is your organization or not.
Yeah.
You cannot, de-link yourself from the way you're interacting and creating a whole thing. One of the things maybe it will be interesting for you to explore with us, Raghava, is how culture is often looked at something standing out there. But if I look at culture from an Indic perspective, it is being created moment to moment, because all of reality is being created moment to moment, and I'm only one part of that. Yeah. How do you look at this from a civilizational context, and what happens when you replace an idea like this with a structural idea of culture?
So this question of who we are and exploring that before you get to the macro principles of governance, or I want to just disambiguate a couple of words and show a paradox that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right? Because they underpin the entire thought and the mind-making process that generate both civilizational worldview, the one that is currently the dominant one, and the organizations that spawn out of that worldview as well.
Correct.
This contradiction between reason and freedom without the idea of the mind, to me, that seems to be a central problem. So due to an accident of history, due to a certain historical context in Europe, continental Europe in, let's say, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, you had the replacement of a god, from, let's say, a religious god to the god of reason and whatever else is considered as scientific by reason. Right? And because we are capable of reasoning, we are inheritors of a unfettered freedom. This is a central idea that underpins a lot of structures. Whatever we discover as organizational design or civilizational design or public discourse or culture currently, and I'm going to contrast that with the responsibility that the Indic wisdom places on you when you talk about reason and freedom. Clearly, your reason is the function of the quality of your mental process or your mind-body alignment, along with the energy. Now, we never hear this next level of detail in the discourse that's coming to us. Reason is taken as axiomatic. There is no discourse on what is the truth content of your ability to reason. What kind of instrument enables you to reason? And can you consistently reason at a high quality without actually taking care of your resources? So there is no context that I have seen around what is the best way to manage yourself to become capable of reasoning. Now, without that, and since you've linked axiomatically the ability to reason with the ability and the right to unfettered freedom, you have also engaged in an excess of sensory indulgence, because the name of freedom you get to create, you get to consume. Again, there is no feedback loop, or there is no second order thinking about what does that consumption do to the instrument that you are using to reason. So what I think has happened is that we've developed a schizophrenia where we've taken these two new gods, reason and freedom, without an underlying examination of what is the resource that can manage both. So on one hand, you have this zeitgeist of unfettered, uninhibited freedom, which comes to us as the discourse of rights, which even organizations, even business organizations today have to deal with it, right? But on the other hand, you are not able to examine that freedom actually, when you use that to, indulge in a sensory excess, is actually going to affect your ability to reason. How can you be a society that is on 60% drugs and then claim to be building a foundation on reason? Where is that basic logic? Are you not losing? Are you not incapable of being able to reason when you use your freedom to consume psychedelics or whatever else that you are on? So where is the responsibility that can bind reason and freedom together? And that is something that I see as the exact contrast when you look at the Indian thought process or the civilizational worldview. And that is also our understanding, or at least my reading of our culture. Culture, there are many ways of describing culture. It's a set of behaviors or patterns of behavior that we can actually draw meaning from through ritualized actions. You can also say, I like the way Pankaj, my co-founder, he puts it, drawing from Wade Davis and others, that culture is standing nature. That when the order of nature, which was logical and self-contained and replicative by itself, when that broke down as a matter of evolution, if you will, culture was created to recreate that order. Right? So, for example, when we think about the Indian idea of vrata, you are imposing culturally a norm on yourself to withdraw your senses, to withdraw from consumption-related activity. And that enables you, and this is what I mean, that the Indian way is a very practical way. It is not esoteric. It is when you really feel the hunger in your stomach, when you're doing the vrata, when you're doing your fasting, that you have a deep reflection of who you are. You get back in touch with who you are. You realize that at the end of the day, you are a creature of pattern. And this just one aspect that culture has given you to break that pattern helps you connect with yourself, helps you understand what is a system that actually powers you. And therefore, you don't take anything as an axiom which you cannot experience yourself. You know that you are unreasonable. You know that reason serves passion. You know that unfettered freedom only damages the ability to reason, because the culture has given you both the tools, the stories, and the rituals to experience it. So when I think about the role that culture plays, I look at it in the service of the ideas that are used to make even something like a constitution. When I talk about leadership, I'm also including public leadership within the ambit of our conversation, not just businesses. And today, in fact, the boundaries between these two are disintegrating and almost disappearing. Every organization is also expected to play a role in, let's say, ESG. And there are many, many problems with that framing and how inadequate that approach is. But they are expected to have a certain kind of social consciousness as an afterthought, as an imputation of a law or a rule, rather than the Indian way of generating that as the core activity. And like you said, the way that the Indian design of organization operates, and this is going back to, its organizations are not new, right? You had guilds, you had trade happening from India for thousands of years. It is almost amusing to think that the organizational theory begins with Weber or Taylor or Herbert Simon or Hawthorne, right? That's not true, because organizations, both social organizations and business organizations and political organizations, have been there throughout civilizations from all ages. Right? The principle that you get here is that you need to generate a surplus. My way of understanding dharma, and since we're talking about and positioning this as dharmic leadership, it might be simplistic, it might be it might not be exhaustive, but the way I've understood dharma is, how do you generate a surplus in every interaction, in every relationship? How do you give more than what you can get? Because that surplus is what can then be passed on for intergenerational continuity. If you do not generate that surplus, then you will generate a famine. And then you need to create instruments which are actually going to push the can down the road. Whether you look at the global financial system today, or you look at the challenges of doing things in a political world where you are up against elections every 5 years, but your actions take 15 years to manifest. These are challenges of design and structures which are missing the first principles, right? Because the surplus generation is not enabled. But if you look at the Indian way, firstly, there is a spiritual surplus that is sought. You actually enter into a relationship with anything that you do. It can be a policy, it can be a business organization, it can be a political activity. There is an element of sacralization of that. You make that the sacred core, and you enter into that sacred, into a relationship with that sacred. And in doing that, there is the ahuti, or there is the offering, which is the surplus that you're generating first. And from that surplus, because you generated that energy, that alignment, what we talk about as alignment and the link between vision and actions, is secured because there is something that you're establishing as the core. And that sacred, unchanging core can then help you manage the change and the dynamic part. Right? This seems to be coming to us in all philosophies. I look at yoga, I look at Ayurveda, I look at Samkhya. Everything seems to point to this one direction. So when I looked at organizations, or when I tried to examine it from that perspective, I was, at least in the current organizational design, unable to find what is that unchanging core and what is the theory. And I think it goes back to your point that there is no theory, or there is no examination of the primary content of the mind itself. And we are now hearing, even from the Western academic literature or even business literature, that leaders are energy managers. Right? But what is that energy? What generates that energy? What is this energy management? I agree. I completely resonate with that thought that's coming in, that we are primarily, if you're in a leadership role, you're managing the primary resource of energy that you have. Right? Comes in different forms. But what is your understanding of that energy? And what is your ability to connect with at the level that it can be productive? So I see this as the challenge, that culture, while it has the entire bearing from a macro perspective on everything that you do, is understood in a very limited way. It is not understood in relation to nature. It is not understood in relation to your own mind. It is not understood in relation to energy management. These are three things that I find missing when people speak about culture.
Very, very interesting, Raghava. Just a couple of thoughts, then I'm going to ask you a question again.
Yeah.
See, when we are talking about things in the Institute for Indic Wisdom, what we are talking about is, if you really anchor yourself in Indic wisdom, what you will generate will have 4 characteristics. It will primarily have dharma. Yeah. It will have purnam, a sense of wholeness.
The fullness. Yeah.
Right? It will have anandam. Anandam is not happiness or whatever. Anandam is a deep satisfaction that what you have done is really worthwhile. Or and the 4th is tattvam. That is, we are touching something that is real.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if I bring it into a practical kind of applicable thing and use a small metaphor to get back to your idea of dharma, see, the way I have explained culture is like this. You take, when you're having a disease, what do? You take a small blood sample, you put it in a petri dish, and you stroke it like this, and you come next morning and see whether there is something called efflorescence or not. Yeah, similar word to flourishing. Except here, this gel will only allow certain cells to flourish, and it will kill other cells. So culture is like that, no?
Yeah.
Culture is like this gel, you can't really define it, but when something is put there, it will either flower or it will die. Right. Now, if the culture is saying individuality is extremely important, resources are made for me, I can exploit the resources whichever way I want, right, then the entire discourse can only be between what we are calling as artha and kama, which is what you were talking about, right? Whereas,
there is no dharma.
Right, if you start with a dharmic idea, which says anything I do has to enliven me, enliven my context, and enliven the world, then you're immediately placing these 2 ideas in a third which allows for self-management.
Mm.
I have to ask the question, is my desire going to enliven me and you and the world simultaneously, not
Yeah.
one after the other?
Yeah.
So the moment you do that, you cannot generate the kind of waste we are generating all the time.
Yeah.
For example, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, the amount of waste we generate is a direct measure of adharma,
It is.
right?
And you're trying to have afterthought mechanisms to try and catch it. You
Control
cannot.
it.
When the mind is generating the excess, you cannot catch that with some material process as an afterthought.
Right. Yeah. The other thing is that a cell is dharmic.
Yeah.
Because it has in its DNA, it has a map of the whole.
Yeah.
It has a map of its relationships.
Yeah.
And it has a map of how it should perform.
Yeah.
A virus does not have this map of the whole.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go on a limb or whatever they say, and say that most of current thinking, right, is generating virus kind of behavior from human beings, and it's not creating cell kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me? And does that sound?
I absolutely agree.
That's an easy analogy, no?
It is, and thank you for for that brilliant exposition. It also takes me back to what I've read about the link between the cellular and the social and the cosmic. Right? There is, and we can also think about culture like this. There is intense creative activity happening at the cellular level every single second. Right?
Correct.
And it is when the activity reaches a certain state of stability that it replicates and creates a new cell. Right? But this entire activity is enabled because this is protected by the membrane. Right? And that membrane opens up only to take food and sunlight. So that is managing the energy. It is managing the energy so that the creative activity in the team, if you were to draw an example in an organization, can happen. But it is creating the cultural sort of scaffolding or the energy scaffolding that will enable this activity to happen. And because there is coherence between this, that it is giving me, the macro is giving me what I need for my creative activity. And that is enabling me to replicate, self-organize. This system is stable. Right? It does not require anything else to make it complete.
Regulated.
It is self-sustained. That is the philosophy of life that we are getting, just examining ourselves from from purely biological perspective. And if you then understand that principle, that there needs to be freedom and autonomy at a cellular level for creative activity to happen, but that creative activity has to actually lead to something stable. And it is only stability that can then replicate and scale.
Absolutely.
You cannot scale, because we talk about scale all the time in business today. You're talking about billion, you're talking about the last man standing business models by, just firing the marketing dollars. That is not stable. As a system,
Correct.
It will collapse. And we are seeing that all around us.
Correct. We're already
Because
seeing
we're not drawing the lessons. And that is adharmic.
Adharma.
Fundamentally, anything that cannot sustain is adharmic. And you
Correct.
cannot sustain this because you don't have the mind to look at these things integrally.
Yeah. I'm going to take you further to one more thing, no?
Yeah.
The language that you use when
Yeah.
you have a dharmic idea of self, the organization, how will it differ from the current management language? Like, for example, all of current management language is about progress, is about competition, is, year on year 20% growth. And you know very well that resources are not growing. You're on a limited thing.
Yeah.
And we also know that, collaterals, collateral damage and this, that your current economic model does not cost for any replacement of anything.
Yes.
It only costs for how you scratch it out of the earth, use it and throw. It doesn't even cost for how you deal with the waste.
It does not. It does not account. There is a cost to it, but it does not account that cost.
It does not account. Right. So can you look at this and elaborate on how it translates into everyday language, how it translates into everyday thinking?
No, this is so critical, and I find it almost unbelievable that there is all of this discourse on sustainable development goals, But right at the center of the sustainability discourse, you have SDG 8 about economic development, which is the generator force for every other excess. And you don't have a system to not just think about not generating it, but you don't even have a system to internalize the externalities, as somebody puts it, right?
Correct.
That you don't, your bottom line reporting today, your accounting does not actually show you the cost of the production. You have cost of goods sold, you have cost of revenue, you have, your P&L has all of these. But what is the cost of your extraction? What is the cost at a social, ecological, environmental level is not even brought into the discourse. Even more dangerously, you actually put a band-aid on a simmering wound, which it's a cancer, and you're trying to address it with a band-aid by believing and making others believe that just a phony idea like ESG without a fundamental examination of what is the generative force can actually help people or help organizations. So not only are you generating excess, but you're also generating ideas that completely obfuscate and absolve your moral responsibility from thinking about the excess. So this is a twofold thing. Your mind is already, because you are talking efficiency, you're talking quarter to quarter results, you're talking about input to output ratio, and you consider that to be scientific, right? You consider that to be the management method, but you're not actually having a thought about the second order, third order consequences at all. And any possibility of having that is also completely made redundant because you've given yourself nice sounding terms. Again, it goes back to the link between reason and freedom. Because you have the freedom to distort language, and your mind is constantly distorting this language by giving you this, nice idioms, ESG, SDG, and all of that, you have absolved the moral responsibility of actually taking some steps towards that. Right? And what does an organization that is rooted in Dharma do? It will first, the language will very, very fundamentally be different. You will not consider efficiency as a single metric. You will not denominate all values as currency. In fact, you will ask yourself, what is the growth in my relationship with myself, relationship with my team or with the extended society, and relationship with nature. In fact, in our own team, one of the things that brings us together, because there are obviously things that happen at a daily level, is that every couple of months or so, you get back and you sit around, whether you do a homa or a ritual, whatever sacred element that you create for that, you sit down and you contemplate on that. And you ask yourself, and it's a conversation that we have in the team, that what is the one thing that you would like to see changed within you? So the emphasis in a dharmic organization is always on continuous evolution. And it is not seen as a step that you achieve and it is going to stay there, because we are all susceptible. You might think you've reached there, but the Mahabharata tells us this, and all other Indian literature tells us this, that we are just one step away, just one bad decision away from throwing everything that we've created. And in our own experience, we've come close to this. We've seen organizations collapse because you are just not able to manage your mind energy at that time. So you are constantly aware. So this is the link between awareness and evolution, that you are aware of your own vulnerability. I think the Dharmic organization distinguishes itself by creating that psychological comfort to actually explore your own vulnerability. And your work in this about the shadow, while you talk about the power of Arjuna as the integrator and the force, but you also talk about the shadow, that lurks right next to that power. And so you understand this as the form of nature itself, that when you create something, the opposite is also created. That seems to be the nature's way of balancing it. And the Indian way is to harmonize these two things.
Correct.
So you're always looking at harmony. One of the things that I find about Dharmic organizations is you're constantly attempting to harmonize. So which means that you know the power of or the danger of your ego. And this harmony requires you to actually let go of that. And you create rituals around it. And this cannot happen only with a dialogue, because there is a lot of focus today on empathy and dialogue. It cannot just happen with that without a core knowledge system. What I find missing is that there is no praxis for this. You
Correct.
think you can have a dialogue. You think you can empathize. You cannot empathize with anybody else. You actually, in my understanding, you don't empathize with anybody else. You only empathize if you felt that emotion within you and when you see that reflected in somebody else. So if you really want to expand your scope as a leader and you want to connect with many people, you need to contain the multitude within you. You should have experienced all of your vulnerabilities openly and very, very deeply.
Absolutely.
When you do that, then it expresses, because you are empathizing with yourself. You're seeing yourself, a reflection of yourself in that other person. So I think these are the things that are different, that you first talk about your own self. You talk about relationships just as much as you talk about outcomes. You talk about the evolution that is happening in you, whether you are able to generate a surplus or not. And you talk about empathy in a real way of knowing yourself. And are you able to assimilate newer emotions, newer kind of relationships that inevitably you will have to as a leader? Are you able to integrate that or not? I find this to be very, very different. And the vocabulary here that we use is yajna, tapas, sadhana. These are all very deep terms. This becomes part of your psyche. It becomes part of your culture. In the daily exchange, you talk about things from a dharmic perspective. So you ask yourself, will this sustain, firstly? And what is the shakti that needs to be created for this to sustain? And what is the tapasya required to generate that shakti? And how do we come together to generate that shakti as a yajna? So what is seen as esoteric Vedic terms actually become the lifeblood and the vocabulary in which you exchange.
Perfect. Very interesting. Yeah. So we're also working on something very similar, Raghava, where we're looking at the basic three Shaktis, no? Icha Shakti, Kriya Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Chit Shakti.
Yeah.
How these interact, and all the things that you're talking about now get contained there, because yoga is all about how the Chit Shakti interacts with these three to create the universe.
Yeah.
So inside me, I'm partaking of this whole universal process by managing my relationship with these.
Yeah.
Right. So
And
words
in
like
elevating your
tapas
Shakti.
and all of that become very central to the way we are looking at it also. That's very interesting.
And this is actually something that I've experienced myself. Once you start thinking about it this way, you understand the word sankalpa in a very different context altogether.
Absolutely.
Right? Sankalpa, of course, we understand that as a resolve, but there is an entire truth to that. Right? It comes from what is the mind that is generating that sankalpa.
Correct.
And it is that then that becomes the icha shakti of that, right? And that is the leader or the founder, whoever you call it. That is the consciousness that the leader creates, and that becomes the akasha. If you were to look at in Panchabhuta terms, that becomes the playing ground in which all other creative activity can happen.
And it cannot be drawn from the outside. It has to come.
Cannot. It is internally.
Dharmic icha. It has to be a dharmic icha.
It is dharmic. Yeah. There is no other way. And then once you look at it, then any idea, any organization, any opportunity that you see, you are able to assess it based on the energy that's behind it.
Correct.
Not just the materiality. You're also intuitively sensing what is the mind that is creating this and what is the potency. Ultimately, the way I look at an organization is what is the creative potency of that. And we have a slightly ill-equipped understanding of creativity and creative agency. We assume that to be a specific kind of act. Every single idea is a creative potency, right? It can be telecalling, it can be an Indic Institute of Wisdom, it can be some cultural activity. Everything needs a creative potency. Whether or not it fulfills its potential is actually, once you start looking at it this way, it will only appear to you as the strength of the sankalpa, which is basically a reflection of the mind that is creating it. And therefore, working on yourself, working on your mind, working on your energy, working on your sankalpa does not de-link from what you need to achieve as a business. There is complete consonance there. The bigger the problem, the bigger the challenge, the bigger the undertaking that you want to go through, you start digging in deeper to find greater reserves in yourself. The first question that you will ask itself is different. You will not talk about the externality. You will first say, okay, if this is the scale of challenge, the problem solving method will become internal focus to build your endurance.
Correct.
And that seems to, and this is experience, this we are seeing. Some ideas land well, some ideas don't. Right? It's the same team, same kind of resources, same creative talent. Why doesn't it happen? There is something deeper at play here.
Two questions I'm going to ask you, and then we'll open it out, right?
Sure.
One is, see, I prefer the word resonance to the word empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason why I prefer that word is, if my tuning fork
Yeah.
has not really become capable, no, like if I'm a piano or a veena,
Yeah.
right? If some notes are dead,
Yeah.
if you speak to me from those notes, I'll never even hear it.
Never. Yeah.
Yeah. So resonance, I think, is very critical, and that's created only if I deeply look at myself and look at my humanness to start
Yeah.
with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The other question I have is, when you were talking just now or whatever, I was reminded of Milton Friedman, right? Is it Milton Friedman, or who's the other Friedman? The guy who says you have to work only for shareholder returns.
Thomas Friedman, is it? Or
Thomas-
Milton? That's Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I was looking at that and saying that what that has created in the minds of people who create organizations
Yeah.
is the legitimacy of
Yeah.
money, as
Yeah.
though money is the only thing that gives ownership.
Yeah.
And when I've worked with organizations, I find that the most powerful energy, Shakti, is the
Yeah.
Icha Shakti, which is psychological ownership of the organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, and me and my friends in Barefoot Governance,
Yeah.
we've worked with large projects
Yeah.
where just 3-4 of us are going, talking to this group of people from the village. They have all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
We ask them, what is your dharma regarding water, for example?
Yeah.
And these people who are supposedly uneducated know what it is.
Yeah.
And when they make a commitment, they stick to it,
Yes.
come what may.
Yeah.
And it is this psychological ownership and the power of that helped us
Yeah.
work with Tamil Nadu water systems.
Yeah.
We worked in Orissa and various places like that, where the moment you have evoked this psychological ownership,
Yeah.
it does phenomenal things.
It does.
But today, organizations are structured on financial ownerships,
Yes.
right? So if you conceive of a dharmic design,
Yeah.
how would you look at this question?
I'll actually give an example that has impacted me profoundly when I understood this. On water itself, Shiv Ganga project in Chhattisgarh, they have about, I think it impacts about 800 villages or something now. But when it started, when Mahesh Sharma ji started working with the villages there, first thing that he did is to understand what is the actual way of cohesion building for the villages themselves. And these are all tribal districts, or what you call tribal districts. And in his interactions, he found that they have an annual ritual called Halma. Halma is a collective oath that they take. And they do it with Shiva. It's a compact that they establish with Shiva. He is the primary deity there. So this principle, the first principle, that you are firstly entering into a sacred relationship with something that you establish as higher. You see that. And this thing of Halma is a collective ritual where the entire village comes together. And whatever is conceived as the greatest work that they need to achieve together, they establish a sankalpa and they call it the Halma. And that Halma is offered to the deity, to Shiva. So this strengthening of the psychological reserve, there is a ritualistic aspect to this. And there is a sacred aspect to this. And you see this as the principle. You understand in corporate organizations, particularly in software development, we talk about Scrum rituals. In game development, we used to obsess about ritualized play. How do you create appointment mechanics for people to come back to your game every day? but you don't actually draw from the larger civilizational experience that you have. And here he brought 800 villages together and revived 2 rivers and actually restored the entire forest and the water resources.
Sure.
Simply by actually tapping into the cultural ethic of that land and the people.
Correct.
So this is, that example is there with us. It's a case study that's available to us.
We've done it.
So every year, even now, they take a
Raghava,
halma. Yeah.
Suresh, myself and Pradeep and all, we worked on this and we've done it, so we know.
I know.
It's
I know,
not-
and I want to
Not
actually
somebody
learn
else's
from
example.
your-
I've been part of watching this happen, and the
Yeah.
kind of and Pradeep has done phenomenal things in the whole tribal belt with
Yeah.
just this evocation of the kind of rituals you're talking about,
Yeah.
the kind of psychological commitments people make to this larger goal, dharmic goals.
Yeah.
This cannot be done to an economic goal. It cannot be done to a financial goal.
The economic
Finance is
part.
a part of the whole process,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the commitment is to the dharmic goal.
Yes. Yes. And that is actually, and I think it goes back to a very fundamental sense of who we are at our barest level. Are we good inherently, or are we bad? In some societies, you are taken as good, and the systems and institutions are built that you want to do good, and therefore trust is taken as de facto.
Absolutely.
And in some institutions, some cultures, trust is not seen as the base condition.
Correct.
Violence is seen as the base condition. Power is seen as the base condition. So your entire architecture is to use power as arbitration. And this creates strange kind of discourse. Even in corporate, one of the things in businesses that I found is you keep oscillating between theories of leadership almost every 2 years. All around you in your environment, every single day, the message that you get, the feedback that you get is that power has the power of arbitration. Hierarchy arbitrates. And then you talk about servant leadership.
Correct.
It is just dissonant.
Not
Everybody is playing this out performatively. Everybody in an HR meeting, in a training workshop, everybody is talking about servant leadership. The minute they step out, they realize that arbitration is only through hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it creates a very strange fracture.
Correct.
Because you don't have this thing to converge. So these are not
the
just
resonance also that I'm talking about.
Yeah, clearly.
Who I am will resonate. No. So if I'm only believing in Rambo power, that is all that I will radiate. No, I can talk about anything else, but I will be Rambo.
Yes.
But if I really understand the Pandavas and I know how to evoke each of those 5 guys appropriately, I will respond differently.
Yeah.
Right? And I won't respond from what's in it for me. If
Yeah.
I'm really on a dharmic basis and my sankalpa is dharmic, my first question is not going to be what's in it for me.
Yeah.
So there are so many simple but profound ideas here. Shall we
Yeah,
just
it's a mind,
look
it's
at
a cognitive
questions,
shift.
Raghava? Shall we just look
absolutely.
at questions if people have?
Sure.
Yes, we have a couple of questions and request. I think someone had also raised their hand. If we could just raise their hand again and let me know the question. Meanwhile, we also have Anandji. He says, I would like you both to talk a bit about the issue regarding leadership and culture in the context of RNA.
Rina.
Rina.
Not, I don't think it's DNA, RNA. It's
Yeah,
Rina.
I was thinking that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Rina.
Yeah, I mean, I can share, and then of course Raghu can illuminate after that. This is again, I think this goes back to what I was trying to say about excess and creating surplus. One is a culture of excess, which is taking everything, and one is a culture of creating surplus. And this culture of surplus comes to us in the idea of Rina, right? And the Rina itself also is a representation of what you see in the larger cosmology. And that's why creation stories, that's why stories of origin matter, because everything is derived from there. When the Indian mind looks at the universe, it feels a sense of gratitude that the sun is rising every day. And it is exactly because the sun is rising every day at the appointed hour that you have the entire universe functioning. And it is because Earth is exactly at the distance that it should be from Sun that the possibility of life itself emerges. A little here or a little there, then we won't be having a webinar on any of this. So when we talk about the things that hold the larger cosmic structure in place, we are talking about Rita. And you derive your understanding of life, your understanding of society from that. If the sun is doing this on a daily basis, if Earth is rotating on its own axis, and if it is exactly managing the distance that it should to make sure that life and the possibility of life continues to happen, then what do you do when you're trying to replicate structures for yourself in your life and in your society? You understand that there is a cosmic debt that you are born with, which is the idea of Runa. You are nobody. It needs the entire village and the society to rise you. So how can you talk about rights as unmitigated? You cannot, right? Because your entire existence, the truth of your existence is that you're born into debt. You're born into a debt for your ancestors. You're born into a debt that you have with your parents, with your gurus, with the rishis, with the entire cosmos and biodiversity that sustains you. So this idea of Runa, if we are able to somehow bring it into organizations, this is what I meant by the culture of surplus generation. That when you have to, and let's bring it down to basics, right? On a daily basis, when you go to work, and it can get very mechanical, it will get very mechanical. Your job involves either coding or creating a webinar or writing down a document or attending a meeting, whatever it is. It is in those moments which are ordinary, mundane, and which will give you all the reasons to actually seek out an exit for yourself. It is in those moments, if you are able to somehow remember the idea of Runa, and you ask yourself, you bring your awareness back into that moment, understand what's happening in your mind, and you ask, when I'm irritated with someone, when I'm really unhappy, when I'm unpleasant in my own experience, can I bring myself to ask at that moment, what is the Runa that I have? I really love the word that you used, Raghu, in explaining this, the idea of psychological ownership. Psychological ownership comes to us from this metaphysics of Runa, Rita, these things. Once you understand, I think it generates gratitude. And I have a lot of affinity for gratitude because I see a direct link with gratitude and contentment generating everything else. If you're able to feel a sense of gratitude towards the universe, right, then you will not let small things affect you. Of course, we're all human, we'll all falter, but the purging of that emotion and getting it back to the stable state is that much more possible. And you create that becomes your habit. This is the real atomic habit that we need to generate, of cultivating gratitude and ownership, not when we have every reason, not when you get a bonus, but when you're having an unpleasant. And that is the surplus that you generate in relationships. When you absorb somebody's unpleasantness and you're able to hold that, then you realize that you have a currency. And that currency is trust. That is respect. And leadership is only about trading in trust, respect, and these things. You don't have anything else. It's only, the equity stock for you as a leader is in every interaction, have you managed to generate trust and respect or not? Nothing else matters. And that requires functional competence, that requires behavioral competence, that requires knowledge and all of those things. But the outcome is just that. So I look at Rana as that. How do you generate trust and respect in leadership? And how do you generate that psychological ownership that Raghu spoke about?
Yeah, very interesting, Raghava, and whoever asked the question. Just before our webinar started, I got this little thing over WhatsApp. Can you imagine? Yeah, which is a letter that Steve Jobs wrote to himself.
Okay.
When he was ill or something like that. It must have been after he was ill. Yeah, a year or so before he passed away.
Yeah.
And it's exactly about what we're talking about. I'll just read out the piece. He says, I grow little of the food I eat.
Yeah.
And of the little I do grow, I do not breed or perfect the seeds. I do not make any of my clothing. I speak a language I did not invent or refine.
Yeah.
I did not discover the mathematics I use. I am protected by freedoms and laws I did not conceive or legislate, nor do I enforce or adjudicate. I am moved by music I did not create myself. I needed medical attention. I was helpless to help myself survive. I did not invent the transistor, the microprocessor, the object-oriented programming, or most of the technology I work with. Yeah, I love and admire my species, living and dead, and I'm totally dependent on them for my life and for my well-being. Sent to himself through his iPad.
And this is the patron saint of creativity, the patron saint of ambitious marketing. This is the patron saint of globalized product glitz.
Who read autobiography of the yogi every year?
Yeah, I know. The favorite Steve Jobs book that I have read is not a biography or an autobiography or whatever is written. It's a book called Creativity Inc. One of the most profound accounts of Jobs' transformation from Apple to Next to actually his work with Pixar. Yeah. And it is at Pixar that he truly understood what creativity really means. And that is why his second innings at Apple, his ability to build a creative relationship with a designer, with an artist towards a product and respecting all of that, actually came by serving the artist at Pixar.
Correct.
And this is, Ed Catmull writes about this. And Ed Catmull is one of the seminal contributors to animation and art, the mind behind Toy Story itself. But it's a fantastic book I would recommend for anybody who wants to understand the life and work of Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
We have a couple of more questions, Raghavji. I can just take them. Tushar's one.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Is it relatively easy or tougher to run an organization based on dharmic values and principles? Does it take a certain amount of time before the practical benefits of shifting to a dharmic way of management start becoming evident to all the other stakeholders? Is there a measurable threshold for this?
See, all that you have to do is to study Arvind. The whole Arvind Eye Clinic thing and Seva. There are so many organizations that have been based from the beginning on dharmic values. They start operating, there's no time gap. And the practical benefits are simply enormous. Yeah, the problem is what is written about are organizations that reinforce the kind of mindset that Raghava was talking about. Power, hierarchy, and exemplifying power rather than really exemplifying service.
I'll just add from a personal perspective that I think that it's important that we reframe the questions, because easy or hard is a function of, again, going back, what is the kind of work that is happening on yourself. Right? So rather than project whether it is easy or hard or whether others will notice, if you are able to internalize that gaze and ask yourself, am I able to bring behaviorally a bit more dharmic consciousness in myself? What I've found is the more you do that, and we should be very honest to ourselves, none of us is completely that. This is a journey. We are not the 1%, at least I am not. Right? So while we speak of it, we speak not as authorities. We speak as seekers. We speak as very, very vulnerable people who have a glimpse of what that greatness looks like, who are trying to find the means within ourselves to stick to that. And we fail. We fail 90% of the times, and maybe, it's only the 5-10% that we succeed internally. But what is amazing is that once you fix that compass there, you will never suffer meaninglessness. At least that is fixed. You know that is the North Star. And your behavior, your transformation is towards that. And therefore, you have reclaimed the agency from all other external validation to yourself. And when you do this, automatically you will see that the sphere of influence increases. More and more people connect with you. They are able to actually get you in the first conversation itself. So when you speak about thresholds, measurability, ask yourself, what is the quality of transmission in every conversation? Did I fully understand? Did the other person fully understand? Because if you bring the entire idea of organization to its basic foundations, it is conversations.
Absolutely.
These are the micro foundations. So one way of looking at it is the quality of your conversation improving? And is the truth content of that improving, which means that the impact will endure? Then the second order impact of your attrition, your human potential growth, and all of those things you will see.
There's one more easy question. How does one transform into a Dharmic leader? Come and join our programs, man.
Attend Raghu's workshop.
We actually have a whole, this is like a laddu question, no? So we really, that's exactly what we're working on.
Yeah.
How do you dip into yogic practices, Vedantic practices, and discover inner presence? How do you discover levels of yourself that are not in the avidya kshetram, which is the entropic field, and create coherence in yourself? Yeah. That's the key. And then, of course, you can apply it in different things, but sure, come and we will teach you.
I love the way you have articulated this, the whole entropic field, the idea of Dharmic kshetra and Kurukshetra. It's something that suddenly you have those insights that just capture everything that you have been voicing in your head, but you don't have a way to actually frame it into one sort of logic, right? When you spoke about the entropic field, and when I understood from you about the idea of Karma Kshetra, Kurukshetra, Dharma Kshetra, it was very clear, like what you are arriving at. I'm very, very excited. Yeah, my recommendation is join the programs.
So just to elaborate a little bit on what Raghava is saying, see, it's because of the question, and Raghava said 2-3 times, can you be vulnerable? Like that's what Arjuna did, right? He said, I really don't know what is right, became vulnerable, and asked the question, what is the right thing to do? Yeah. It's not as though he didn't know the history of what had brought them to the war, but he wanted to ask once again, am I really grounded on the right sankalpa, the right thing to do? That is what transforms the Kurukshetra into the Dharmakshetra. Yeah. And what you were speaking about, about everyday tasks, they're all part of the Kurukshetra task, I have to get this small task done, I have to get this letter gone, I have to do this. But if I have that larger thing that you were talking about, the inner compass, then every one of these is part of a Dharmakshetra context, and it's not part of the Kurukshetra context. This inner shift is very critical.
That is so profound. And that is so, I think the amazing thing about this framing is that it's very visceral. You can almost see these two fields within you.
Correct.
You are the same person, but you know the emotion, the feedback that you get when you are in the Dharma Kshetra, and you know the confusion, the angst, and the apprehension that you get when you are in the Kurukshetra.
Correct.
And if you are able to shift from here to here, that is the transformation that we're talking about.
That's right. That's right.
Beautiful. We're having a couple of more questions, but I think we will just take maybe one or two. Dinesh Chandraji is asking, what is common between servant leadership and dharmic leadership?
Common, I think, is easy. What is important is to realize the distinction, the way I look at it, right? Common is the seva bhava that Raghu spoke about, and the ability to offer, the tyaga, the sadhana, the tapas that we spoke about, right? The understanding of dharma in all its complexity also makes context your friend, right? You understand that it is not about servant or leading. It is not about one way or the other. There is no only one way. It is about what is the context. It's the same Krishna who is advising that violence is okay in Kurukshetra. There he is not at the end of it, while, just in Bhagavad Gita, from my limited understanding, you can see the transition, all of that. from trying to help as a friend to finally saying you seek refuge in me and you go ahead and do this, right? And then also saying, okay, consider everything else, but you make your decision. This is all context. It's contextual awareness. So the one thing that's unique about Dharmic leadership is that it respects context tremendously. And it always tries to synthesize the context with the individual autonomy towards the larger purpose that needs to happen. So these three things are always, what is the outcome for Dharma? What is the more sustainable outcome that we want? What is the context in which we are having to have this conversation? And who is the individual? What is the level of awareness of that individual? So if you are a leader, then you have a simultaneous view of all the three. Where is the individual? What needs to be the outcome? And what is the context in which this conversation or this situation is being appraised?
Yeah. Let me just add a small thing to this, no? With my favorite Mahabharata thing. Servant leadership is Nakula. Dharmic leadership is the dialogue between all five, which is mediated by Arjuna and Krishna. Which is all contextual, everything that you're saying. Huh? That whole dialogue between the two is to say, what is the context? Who am I in this context? And so on.
And if you understand this, it's you get ease, because you know, like the Bruce Lee statement, you become like water. And water is strength. You take the shape of what is required in that context. That if it needs assertion, you bring assertion. If it needs empathy, you bring empathy. If it needs a little bit of direction, you give direction. You are clear, right? And therefore you are very flexible. And that flexibility builds persuasion. You see that good leaders are very persuasive. Right? They make their whatever intent is, they translate that into your intent, not by manipulation, but not by force, but by reasoning, but by contextual evaluation and tying things in a harmonious way. That seems to be the crux. Of course, we'll not succeed all the time. We'll have more failures than successes, but at least the principle is there.
We have a very interesting question from Avniji. She speaks of, can you talk about Shatru Bodh as a responsibility for a Dharmic leader so that people don't start rooting for the wrong ideas?
Say that again.
Can you talk about Shatru Bodh as a responsibility for a Dharmic leader so that people don't start rooting for the wrong ideas?
Yeah, so a bit of context for this. I'm assuming that's the context that this question is coming from. At Brihat, Pankaj especially, and both of us, Pankaj and I, we've been articulating the idea of Swayambodh and Shatrubodh, the idea of knowing yourself and knowing the other in a civilisational sense. Of course, that's not in the same context as an organizational leadership. But when you start talking about civilizations, it's very important to develop the comfort, like how Raghu gave an example, that the virus in a system is the other. Right? It is not something that is compatible with the system that you have. And therefore, the response to that has to be very clear and concise. It's also the story of Gita, right? You can have all the other idea of oneness, but in this context, you will need to be very clear. So that is the idea of Shatrubodh and Swayambodh. I think that's where the vocabulary is coming from. And the question, is it necessary so that people don't get attracted to the wrong ideas? Absolutely, yes. And again, I take it back to the quality of the mind that we need to generate. So even for you to actually develop that Shatrubodha and Swayambodha, which is contextual awareness, intelligence, because even with the Shatru, you'll have a lot of things in common. There is also moral agency for the Shatru. But so you have to be very clear about what you are disagreeing with and why, where you're coming from. And that means that in your mind, clarity of perception. See, all of this goes back to your apparatus being sharp. What are your fundamental resources? Your memory, your awareness, your powers of cognition, and your powers of perception. What we call yogic dharmic leadership is a constant cleansing of the instrument so that this remains sharp. Sure, Raghuji can give us a whole 5-day workshop on this, but this is the way I understand it. Right? Once you do that, then you will not, if you actually even study a little bit of Shastra method, not the Shastras itself, if you are No, we are unfortunately not exposed to that as part of our education. But if you look at Yoga Sutra, if you look at even any other Shastra, this rigor and the discipline of thinking in that just shines through. You cannot get away saying something fluffy. You cannot. Because everything is dialogic. The Sisha is constantly questioning. I don't understand what this means. Why are you saying this? You said this in the other context. How are you saying this in this context like this? There is no reprieve. So the mind that comes through that kind of knowledge system, that kind of rigor, is automatically able to also understand what is true, what is not true. Whatever is true and dharmic becomes Swayambodha. Whatever is not dharmic. Also, you need a knowledge component to that. You need to know theologies, you need to know cultures, you need to know weapons, you need to know international strategy and global politics and all of that. But that is second layer. Even that is a function of the quality of mind. So I'm taking it back to the most fundamental thing that we need to work on, even for Shatrubodh. But I agree with you that Shatrubodh is absolutely important so that we don't get attracted to the wrong ideas.
And anyway, I'm the meaning-making process. No? If my meaning-making is based on avidya, whatever I do will only be avidya.
Yeah.
If I'm based on a dharmic or a more dhyana-based space I come from, my perception will be more accurate, whatever I'm looking at, whether it's politics or whether it's business or whatever. Yeah, so the two are complementary and absolutely important.
On that note, I will request to end the session as we are little bit pressed for time. And
Sure.
thank you so much, Raghavaji. Thank you so much, Raghu. It was enriching, and I think it was a very inspiring session, to say the very least, for someone who is stepping into some of these leadership spaces, even not just in our organizational spaces, but also personal leadership. Some of these ideas, I think, are absolutely applicable even in those areas. I'm feeling very grateful to be here.
Super.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Raghuji. As always, my conversation with you is more lesson for me. Right? So I take back a few lessons and a lot of learning.
It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. It was lovely.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Namrata.